Welcome to the Whisky Business Podcast, where we dive into the rich and fascinating world of whisky and the equally complex landscape of business. I'm your host, Ash Plaisted, here to guide you through conversations that blend the culture and enjoyment of great whisky with the craft of building lasting business success. Each episode will be an exploration of the subtle connections between the smooth complexities of a fine dram and the strategic decisions that shape thriving enterprises. So pour yourself a glass, settle in, and join us as we discover how passion and precision make all the difference in both whisky and business. Hello. Hope wherever you are in the world today, it is an excellent day. It's been a pretty incredible day in the world, actually, with the recent US elections, returning Donald Trump to the presidency, stock markets reacting to that. Lots of things going on in the world. Interested in what's going on in your world. In my world today, I want to talk to you a little bit about a particularly meaningful whisky that I have and some of the flow over of whisky to risk in business, hence the name of the show, Whisky Business and Risky Business. So where will I start? Okay. A little town called Oban. A few months ago, I went on a trek, a adventure, a mission with my son Tom to Scotland. We visited 16 distilleries, hiked up 2 or 3 mountains, had a fantastic time. Banked a hell of a lot of memories, tasted a lot of whisky, saw a lot of the wonderful country that is Scotland. Now, one of the places that we visited twice, actually, and stayed for a couple of days is a beautiful seaside town called Oban. Now, Oban is the Gaelic for Little Bay. Now, it's a town that really celebrates the beauty of small things. And none of these things are more famous than the Oban Distillery, which was built in 1794 by some local entrepreneurs, the Stevenson brothers. And the distillery itself, which we visited and had a tour of, is trapped between some ancient old cliffs and the sea. And the town of Oban effectively developed around this distillery. And this prevented any real expansion for the past 200 years. It's a trapped area of land, sea and cliffs. And the Oban distillery itself is a tiny, I guess, lantern-shaped, copper pot looking type distillery that sits historically amongst the smallest distilleries in Scotland, but far from the least well known. And it still uses traditional type of tub called worm tubs that impart a particularly unique distillery character. So let's talk a little bit about this whisky. And if I was to reach back behind me, this is the whisky that I'd like to draw your attention to. This is Oban's single malt Scotch whisky. Now, Oban, if you go to a map of Scotland and look at it front on, Oban is down the bottom left-hand corner on the coast. And as I've said, it's a seaside town trapped between the cliffs and the ocean. Now, this particular vintage is called Young Teddy, the Maclean's series, or Maclean's, depending on what part of the world you're from. Young Teddy. This is in honour of the legacy of the Maclean family at the Oban Distillery. Now, this particular whisky I picked up from the distillery. I didn't buy this online and get it sent to me. I personally collected this at the Oban Distillery. It was recommended to me by the head distiller there. It was amongst, shall I say, several litres of beautiful single malt whisky that I don't want to use the word smuggled back into Australia, but let's say it just slipped back into Australia through customs at the same time there was an IT outage. Anybody in Australia know that particular time back in late or mid-July. So this is the Young Teddy Maclean's. It's a 50.8% ABV, which is really in the sweet spot. It's one of only 4,542 bottles made, which might sound like a lot, but it's a very limited release. So this is the Oban Young Teddy McLean series, one of three. Now, just let me tell you a little bit about a Young Teddy. Now, young Teddy McLean says, "This bottling is incredibly special to me." And I'm quoting young Teddy here and my family as we continue to build the McLean's legacy here at the Oban Distillery for generations to come. We've talked and debated the various elements and influences that deliver that unmistakable character of Oban, talking late into the night about how different sherry casks, and let me tell you, personally, I love sherry cask, particularly dry sherry cask influenced whiskies. So for the McLeans, it influenced them to create something they've never tasted before. And eventually the curiosity got the better of them. And the result is this truly special whiskey with rich, fruity flavours coming through. It's a gift to our distillery and our fans, from our families to theirs. So this is a particularly delightful whiskey. And if I was to give you the tasting notes for aficionados of whiskey, as you can see, it's got a deep amber colouring with copper lights, an exceptional fine beating. Its body is medium. On the nose, it's mild, even with the strength that it has of that ABV. It opens with a sweet scent of caramel, hinting at sticky toffee pudding. After a while, this is joined by a faint maritime scent, suggesting clean, fresh, salt sea air, salt crystals, and dry sand. And the nose becomes creamier. Treacle coffee or nut brittle appears in the development, with a drop of water bringing out coffee aromas. This is straight from their tasting notes. On the palate, it's a creamy, smooth texture leading into a taste that is sweet overall with a trace of salt in mid-palate. Vibrantly, it seems to cocoon the sweet, fresh sea air hints of Oban in spicier, sweeter robes, making this a weightier dram while retaining its essential character. And water does not change the balance. And by that, what you can do with single malt whiskey, Scotch whiskey, is obviously having it neat, no ice, is you can add drops of water, which chemically can change the balance and flavour of the whiskey. Now, what they're saying with this whiskey, that water does not change the balance. And the finish is long and spicy with a shake of white pepper. Adding a little water does bring up the last glimpse of the sherry cask characters. So that's a little bit about Oban, the town. If you're ever in Scotland, I highly recommend putting Oban on your must-see itinerary. Make sure you do yourself a favour and head to the Oban Distillery. Do some tasting. They've got an excellent little whiskey bar inside the distillery, and you can pick yourself up. I think this one is sold out. There are two others in the series. I actually think the most recent one is just gone on the market, but the first two are all sold out. And I haven't opened this one yet. I did taste it at the distillery, but I'm collecting this one because, as you can see, with a lot of the whiskies that I've got, some I've opened and tasting, and a lot of them I'm collecting, because whiskey is a very interesting asset class that there is a whole market for collecting and reselling whiskey and measuring its increase in value. For example, there's a bottle up here, the Lakes District whiskey, which costs about $140. That recently sold at auction for over $2,000. So whiskey is a very interesting, appreciating asset class, particularly if you get the vintage, the provenance, and the rarity and the desirability right. So, just as a last thought about risky business and whiskey business. So I've talked a little bit about whiskey business today, and we've talked about one of my favourite places in Scotland, Oban, and one of its beautiful whiskies. So how does that transfer over to risk in business? Well, obviously, nothing happens without risk. And the very essence of success is born of taking risk. So how do we interpret that in the world of mortgage broking? particularly my world, and I talk about this a lot with clients, that risk-taking is not something to be feared, it's not something to be avoided, but it's also not something to necessarily approach impulsively. So risk-taking, and I would argue that good risk-takers are some of the best granular thinkers that there are. So risk-taking is not about just impulsively acting in defiance of evidence. Risk-taking is about assessing risk-reward and working out best and worst case scenarios and a path forward with alternates should you get blocked on the way through. So risk-taking, a little bit like tasting a new whiskey, you don't know quite what you're going to get, but you've still got to open yourself up to the experience, but have a plan. So this is my personal opinion about risk. Risk is calculating the likely returns of any given risk and then making sure that as you move forward into that process that you understand that bandwidth of risk that you've worked out. And if all of a sudden it falls above or below that, you probably know that it's time to step back and review the path that you're on. This applies to business as it does in anything in life. Risk-taking is not about blindly going forward, irrespective of what evidence gets given to you or that the world or that your method or process presents. So risk-taking is about having a plan, having a goal, but also being able to receive data and feedback in real time and pivot and adapt and be flexible on the way through. Hope you've enjoyed this discussion about whiskey business and risky business, and that you get a chance to enjoy this fabulous peaty single malt Scotch whiskey from Oban. I'll see you on the next episode of the Whiskey Business Show.